at this point we've got Dratus installed, and I want to take a look at adding some notes into Dratus. And the first thing I actually want to do here is I actually want to create a branch. And the branch is where I'm going to put some notes into. So I select my branch here, and now I can add a note. And notes are pretty simple, just I'm going to say something like to do later. And now I can add in like a list, for example. I want to do some scanning with Nmap, testing with Nessus and Nexpose, and exploiting with Metasploit. So now I can take a look at the preview, and this is what the note will actually look like. So I can save that there, and now I've got a note here, and if I just click on it, I've got to do later. Now I've got some additional notes that I could add. I could say, for example, Nessus follow-up. And I could have a number of things that I actually wanted to follow up on. So you can see the notes are actually pretty useful here. And of course I can have multiple branches, and I could say like new branch here. And then when I go to the new branch, I could add some more notes. So I've got a way to actually really put the data or information that I've got into an order that actually makes some sense for me. I could even add additional branches by just doing an add child here. So now I've got a child node, and I could say Nessus, for example. So now I've got something under here, and I could add a note into there and say Nessus follow-ups. And so I've got all my data organized. I've got a nice little tree structure over here. I've got notes where I want them over here. You can see all of the notes that we created earlier that were on the top level, and now I've got another one underneath it. Now the one thing that I'm actually missing here is doing categories, and so we'll take a look at doing the different categories coming up next. We've been creating some notes, and now I actually want to do some categories to have some places to categorize information in a way that may make a little bit more sense to me. So I've got a number of categories here. I've got a default category, some HTML export ready, and so on. I've got scan results and Nessus output. And now I could actually add a category here. And let's just say I'm going to call it my notes. So now what I've got is a note here, and I could actually assign these different notes to different categories even after they've been created. So I've got Nessus follow-ups as a note here. If I right click on it, I get the assign to, and I could actually put that under my notes. Now you can see the category shows up there, and here I've actually got a couple of different notes, and let's do this. Let's assign this one to Nessus output, and now you can see I've got two categories here. So I've got the category Nessus output, and I've got one note under there, and I've got my default category here. And actually let me create another category, and I'm going to call that category to do. So since this is a to do note, I'm going to assign it as a to-do category. So you can see we've got now, in addition to just having notes and having a whole list of all of the notes here, I can actually break them into categories. And I could add another note here and say another note. And at some point, I'm actually going to put this into one of the categories here, and I'm actually going to put it into to-do just to show what we can do here. I'm going to put it in to-do. And now at some point, if you had a lot of different notes and you wanted to just look at the notes in a particular category, you can see I can actually just collapse the to-do category branch here. And if I were to collapse this one, you'd have the note just disappear. So in terms of visual organization, I can collapse different things to make them appear smaller on the screen here so that I'm only looking at maybe the one category that I want to look at, and I'm not getting distracted by all of the other notes. So if I had a lot of different categories and a lot of different notes, I may want to collapse a lot of the information so that I'm only looking at what I really want to look at. So you can see I've got a lot of capability here in Dratus to do some organization, put a lot of data in, keep track of what I'm doing, have it in different categories, and it makes a really nice organizational tool for the type of work that we're doing here, because there is really a lot of management that's involved in doing these ethical hacking engagements or penetration tests, because there's a lot to keep track of from the different applications and the different services that we're looking at, the different ports that may be open. You may have a wide variety of hosts that are available. I may want to keep track of all of the hosts that I found, in addition to just the subset of hosts that I'm scanning. So I may want to have a category for hosts that were scanned or hosts that were found and put different notes inside of there, and then have a different category for the hosts that were tested and put the notes about what I'm actually doing inside of that particular category. So I've got a lot of options here in terms of how I want to organize it, and you can see I've got the flexibility to really organize it in the way that makes the most sense to me. We're going to review some of the Nmap scan types. Now, you may know or remember that Nmap is a port scanning utility, and so it can actually use a number of different techniques in order to determine whether ports are open or not, and also what operating system is running on the host that you're scanning. So I just want to walk through some of the different scan types that are pretty common and traditional using Nmap. Now, the first thing is I need administrative rights, and since I'm running this under a Mac in this particular case, I need to be able to have administrative rights here. So I'm going to use sudo for that, and I'm going to run Nmap. I'm going to run a syn scan, and I'm going to do that on 192.168.1.39. So I didn't actually specify any ports in this case, so I'm just using the 1,000 or so common ports or well-known ports that Nmap uses by default. And what I did here was just a simple syn scan. Now, what I'm doing with a syn scan is I'm sending out a TCP synchronize packet, and I'm expecting a syn-ack back. So what I'm actually doing is I'm leaving a connection half open because I'm not actually replying with an ACK message. Now, if I wanted to maybe make a little less noise, because a lot of half-open connections may cause some eyebrows to be raised, depending on what sorts of intrusion detection or other monitoring utilities are being used, what I could do is do a full TCP open scan, and that's minus ST here, and we should get the same ports back, and of course we do. So that's a TCP scan where I do the full handshake, and I'm doing the syn, I get the syn-ack back, and then I send the ACK back. I do a full open on the TCP port. So again, these are all TCP ports that we've been looking at so far. I could also do a UDP scan. This SU would be a UDP scan, and I could do 192.168.1.39 again. UDP scans can actually take quite a lot of time because I'm not actually doing a connection establishment, and so there's nothing to indicate whether the message to the port was actually received or not, and so I end up having to do a lot of retransmits if I don't get messages back, because I don't really know whether it was received or whether the port actually wasn't listening or what was going on. So UDP scans can actually take quite a lot of time, and I've seen cases where UDP scans can actually take literally days to finish, depending on how far away the system is, how slow the system is responding, the number of ports that I'm actually scanning. In this case, again, I'm scanning just a default set of ports. If I were to scan all 65,000 ports, that could take quite a lot of time. So I'm going to kill that. And of course there are oddball scans as well, but sometimes these are useful in order to do firewall evasion, for example, or do some other types of scans that may get less noticed. So this would be a Christmas tree scan, and that's where all of the TCP flags are actually lit up. And it's called a Christmas tree scan as a result, because everything is lit up, and it looks like a digital equivalent of a Christmas tree, I guess. So I'm doing a Christmas tree scan, and again, I get the same ports that are open, and because of the way that it responds, we can't really tell whether it's open or whether it's just filtered. In other words, if there's a firewall in between or not. So that's just a few of the basic Nmap scans, and we'll get into some advanced scanning in the next lesson.